So today's session, it's a rather interesting topic on something that's of extreme relevant to our times. And we would be talking about how carbon credits are enabling sustainable agriculture. We'll get a global perspective on the same and also get a more India-centric discussion going. So for that, I would like to introduce our panel for the day. We have Dr. Usha Barwale Zeher, who's the Executive Director of Grow Indigo and a Director at Mexico. We have Mr. Ben Hunt, who's the Newfield Farming Scholar and Catchment Source Manager at Wessex Water, United Kingdom. And we have Dr. Sukhmeet Singh, who's the founder and CEO of A2P Energy. Our moderator for the day is Dr. Bhupender Singh, who's the Principal Scientist at the Center for Environment Science and Climate Resilient Agriculture, ICR-IERI. Now, with that, I would please request Dr. Singh to come to the dais and start the proceedings for the day. And welcome everyone. Welcome to all the panelists.
Friends, welcome. I welcome you to this meeting of carbon farming or carbon credits for sustainable agriculture. As you know, climate change is real. The GHG emissions are continuously rising from the times of the pre-industrial era because of the human activities, fossil fuel burning, change in land use pattern, and this has resulted in an increase in the mean average temperatures. And all of it, when you see, it is directly or indirectly affecting our lives. You see around the extreme events that we were getting earlier were not so frequent, and now they are really frequent activities. We need to thus, adopt, develop, and adapt. We need to have the adaptation and mitigation technologies in place. And if you look at the history of this from the times of 1979, when the first World Conference was on climate change was happened, and then in 1987 we have the Montreal Protocol, which banned the use of chemicals that can damage the ozone layer, to the first IPCC report, first assessment report that came in 1990, to the formulation, establishment of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1994, to 1997, the Kyoto Protocol. In fact, Kyoto Protocol was the first legal binding agreement between 196 countries. And that was the first time we get a hint of emission trading. That is trading in the carbon. We need to cut down the GHGs, and how we cut down the GHGs will determine, what the progress of the country. I think admin team should come into play. They should mute all except the moderator as well as the speakers, please. And okay. And then it comes the Paris Agreement, because the Kyoto Agreement, it left out the emerging economies like developing countries like China and India. And many of them, many of the developed countries, they did not sign the Kyoto Agreement. So came into place the Paris Agreement, Paris Treaty. And this was COP21. Today is the day when we are, moving into COP27, the Conference of Parties 27th meeting, which took place from 6th to 22nd of November. And impact, one salient thing, not only develop funds for taking care of the vulnerabilities, but also the major impetus was how we can fast track the development of the adaptation and mitigation technologies, particularly the mitigation technologies, and take them to the farmers' field. Okay, so this was the major thing that came. If you talk about the first IPC in context of India, the first IPCC report in 1990, it said that India and China were the major culprits, producing 101 million tons of methane, from the rice paddy fields. And at that time, in India alone, if you see, it was said that India produces about 37 million tons of methane emissions. Now, that time the production or the cultivable land under paddy in India was 37 million hectare. And if you calculate, and the productivity was 2 million, 2 tons per hectare.
और उनसे कहा विभीषण
Production was 2 tons per hectare. Now, if you go by that logic, per ton of the production, we were producing half a ton of methane, which is like half a kg of methane production per kg of paddy, which we were producing. A totally absurd value, and which was refuted, and the world was confronted with the evidence, and that evidence came from Indian Agriculture Research Institute. And we told the world that it is not 37 million tons of methane emissions, it was actually 4.1 million tons. And today, we stand at 3.4 million tons of methane emissions from paddy. We have taken so many initiatives in this direction to help our country, our agriculture reduce the GHG emissions. And today's topic of carbon credits for sustainable agriculture, it is very, very important topic, because here we are talking about incentivizing the farmer. Here we are talking about what the farmers will get, what the stakeholders will get if they follow good practices. So what are these carbon credits? What is verified carbon units? How do farmers get benefit of this? What is there for the small stakeholders, large farmers? Whether what practices he needs to adopt in order to have these carbon credits? How do we monitor? What are the gases that are coming under the ambit of carbon farming? So talk about all these initiatives. I'm very happy that we have Ben Hunt from Wessex Water. Vikas has already told you the details. We have Sukhmeet from A2P Energy, and we have Madam Musha Barwale from MACO and Grow Indigo. I think, friends, you will agree with me, it will be most appropriate now to hear directly from Ben Hunt, Sukhmeet, and Usha Barwale ji, our eminent panelists, on what are the implications, what is the role of the industry, what is the role of ground level stakeholders, what is the role of NGOs in ensuring that we together become a part of it, and we devise the maximum, not only reduce the GSGs, but also get it into our practice, that once we follow it, we will be safeguarding our environment, safeguarding our agriculture, and helping the country to meet the net zero emission norms by 2050. With these remarks, I will now request Madam Usha Barwale to kindly give some introductory remark, and then we can ask some questions, please. Madam Barwale, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for inviting me to this discussion, and also thanks to Vikas for organizing it. Very happy to speak briefly about what it is that we are doing. And before I get into the technical part of it, let me just very briefly introduce Grow Indigo. So Grow Indigo is an ag-tech company focused on sustainability in agriculture as a major driver for the company. And to that effect, we have two activities that I would talk about today. One around incentivizing farmers for adoption of regenerative agriculture practices by way of carbon credits, and also how to incorporate biological treatments in the carbon credit program. So which is still work in progress, but it is something we feel which will be very, very important. Now, if we look at the carbon credit programs historically, the smallholder agriculture has never been part of this discussion. And probably the main reason was because of technology. At least one element of it. The second element probably was, at least in the India context, the challenge of trying to track at the smallholder 1 acre farm level, and then to be able to get that incentive back in the hands of the farmer. So what Grow Indigo is trying to do is, and to this effect, we have submitted our first project with a global carbon registry called Vera. And this is around the rice ecosystem. As most people on this discussion know, that rice is
order confirm
the largest emitter in terms of in the crop segment of agriculture in India, outside of cattle. So rice ecosystem makes perfect sense to think about what it is that we can implement, which enables the farmers to earn additional income. And additional income by way of practice change, by having an incentive, the probability that the farmer adopts those regenerative agricultural practices, we feel will be much higher than what it has been historically. So what is a carbon credit? Carbon credit is, and now as we think about it, we think about the carbon credit in the form of carbon dioxide equivalents. And carbon dioxide equivalents would be inclusive of the carbon which is sequestered in the soil, but then also the greenhouse gases which are mitigated, right? So you have both of these combined, presenting a carbon credit. So the three gases that, of course, we are monitoring are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane as the three elements. In case of the rice ecosystem, for now, only two gases become relevant for the immediate near future, which is methane and CO2. Because nitrous oxide, from a biological treatment perspective, there are no models which have been peer-reviewed, which the registries are willing to accept, which then allow you to also compensate the farmer for using the biological treatments, as which we all know are beneficial for the soil and the environment. But that is something that is work in progress, as I was saying. So why the carbon program now for the smallholder farmers? We all know that we've had conservation agriculture promoted for many years in the country, but the adoption rate of these practices has been up and down because of lack of incentive. It's like telling the smallholder farmer, you do it because it is good for me, but there is nothing in it for you, because you don't get and for a farmer who for who the bottom line is the most critical, to say that environmental benefit is what you are doing this practice change for is something hard to absorb and understand. And so that is where carbon credit actually becomes a great incentive, economic financial incentive, which the farmer can get, not just for this year, but as long as they continue to practice the additional practice which they've adopted for over 20 years. So every year they do this.
I'll interrupt you here. I'll give the opportunity to Mr. Sukhmeet and Ben to introduce, and then we will get into the discussion on various aspects.
Yeah? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah,
no, it's fine. Maybe now I'll invite Mr. Sukhmeet, who is the CEO of A2P Energy, which is a company involved in crop residue management and turning into a source of energy. And I think a great initiative. And let's hear from Mr. Sukhmeet, Dr. Sukhmeet. Yeah. May I request everyone to kindly switch off their mics, and you, of course, it is mentioned by Vikas in the chat box that you can submit the the questions. You can submit the questions now. These questions will be taken up for discussion after 4 o'clock. Please, you can submit the questions, please. Dr. Sukhmeet, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bhupinder and IRI team for having me here. Dr. Bhupinder, I also wanted to show the presentation. Is it the right time or later?
Yeah. Please, you can go ahead. Introduce yourself, show a presentation. Okay. Limited to what's max, because we should get sufficient time for discussion.
Yeah, sure. I hope you are are able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Sukhmeet. I'm founder of a company called A2P Energy, stands for Agri to Power. I'll just give you a brief background of myself. I am a mechanical engineer, started working in technology, information technology in financial domain, and specifically in financial technology products around treasury. So that was my experience immediately after my graduation. Then I also worked at Indian School of Business for 7 years. I'm also passed out from there. Did my MBA from ISB Hyderabad. In 2018, I left ISB and started this company A2P Energy. We specifically yeah, so regarding this particular presentation, I'll talk about three things primarily: biomass to energy products, biomass to biochar, and project and sustainable farming practices. Again, I'll try to introduce or have the carbon part of it around each of these topics, and at least give our view and experience on these areas related to carbon. We've discussed about this and the paddy straw burning problem. This was the primary reason why we started our organization of stubble burning. How do we tackle stubble burning, and what we can do with this stubble. This is burned every year. A lot of pollution this year. Also, these were the issues around stubble burning. Our focus was on health and economic benefits for the farmers. This is, we first in 2016 started with a not-for-profit trust, and in 2018 started this company. On one side we have extra stubble, in the second side we have this coal burning problem and our targets as a nation for becoming carbon neutral. Right? So if you see in a broader sense, we have carbon emissions coming out of paddy straw burning, which could be turned into a fuel. On the second hand, we have this low-grade coal being burned, a lot of air pollution because of that, and then somewhere the link is missing. That is what we started our missions with. Having said that, it remains a challenge every year of the straw burning. What we found was that these are the primarily issues why this stubble gets burned every year. Availability, discoverability, small holding size of plots, specifically seasonal variations, less time in between two cropping cycles, dates of cropping being shifted, which causes the in-between cropping cycle duration to be very, very small. So there's an issue in terms of what do you do with the stubble in these small time periods. As a company, what we started doing was we started exploring use of biomass. The first problem was how do we identify where extra biomass is available. So that was our first offering as a company, to plan and see where the excess biomass availability. So we use on the ground surveys plus a lot of technology, satellite imagery on top of that. Then we also collect and process some of this agriculture waste on our own, or we work with other partners on the collection part of it. Then we also run a platform for trading of biofuels and also biochar. So I'll explain more about that. The first challenge was to identify extra biomass and specifically fire burning points, and also that we have done throughout India, specific to district level geographies. That is one of the major emissions emitter from a nation perspective. So a lot of this gets highlighted that, okay, only North India or specifically Punjab, Haryana burns agriculture waste, but this is true for almost each state in India where at least some quantities of agriculture waste is burned. We have our processing facility and also fulfillment through the platform. So I'll talk more about what are the products. So we started collecting the biomass, and the first step was to convert that into biofuels, pellets, agriculture, residue-based briquettes. So we have clients from pharma, FMCG, different clients. This is how it's getting burned. Now okay. So I'll talk about later. So if we see So from a carbon credit perspective, so there are in the whole chain of this agriculture waste collection. The first is the the waste growers itself. I would not say call it sorry waste, but biomass where it's getting generated. So farmers are the key stakeholders, biofuel manufacturers, who collect this biomass and convert that into fuel. And there are companies like us which consolidate either direct biomass or biofuels from these biofuel manufacturers and supply it to different organizations and power plants. So in this whole chain, what is happening is, one is the stubble which was getting burned on the field is getting saved. Second is also, on the right hand side, the fourth stakeholder ABC Corporation. This is replacing, as per the current standards, the actual generator of carbon credits was this ABC Corporation. Uh, the issue comes is that on the back end, so if you see the 3, 2, and 1, and specifically the 1, so if we see from a carbon credit perspective, the farmers who are generators of these biomass and also not letting it burnt on the field is not earning directly anything from the carbon credits perspective. And the ABC Corporation or the thermal power plant, which is actually replacing the coal, gets as the owner of these carbon credits. So I guess this is one of the major issues why the stubble burning problem is still there, and farmers are not able to earn from the carbon credits being generated. Specifically, I'm here talking about the biomass to fuel conversion value chain. So this was about our platform for biomass fire detection and state-wise, year-wise, a lot of data we are taking for the different satellites and putting it for comparison for different ways in which the biomass is getting burnt up. Just to give you an example, if you set up a processing unit for stubble waste conversion, so it can have both carbon impact and also a lot of social and economic impact. If we see, here, this is the published data which we've taken on the right-hand side, prevention of air pollution. If 1 acre of stubble is collected instead of getting it burnt, that's the amount of CO2. So this is basically for 12,000 tons, approximately 6,000 acres, it gets covered, and this amount of CO2 gets prevented from going into the atmosphere. Then there is also issues around, so if we don't take it out and if farmers also don't burn it, put it back. So then there are issues around methane emission and all, which are, I guess, are more harmful than even the burning part. Now coming to the biochar, once we were converting this into fuels, we also explored making of the biochar, considered as one of the major carbon sequestration methods. It is basically, what we are doing on the left-hand side. If you see the process, we collect the stubble, process that into either pellets and briquettes, and then convert that into biochar. Biochar, what it's doing is, as a plant, if it's growing in a natural way, it is taking CO2 from the atmosphere, and then once the stalk has consumed X amount of CO2, we convert that into biochar, and then it is put it in the soil. So that basically helps to put soil back or put carbon back into the soil. That's where the carbon sequestration terminology comes. This is basically, you can see this again, our biochar we converted. So biomass to biochar goes into soil. This is a carbon sequestration, soil GHGs and net GHG abatement. So there's a natural process of biomass into biochar. In India, we have not seen much biochar market, but internationally, it's considered as one of the key sources of the carbon credits. And also, replacing this, the biochar can actually replace some of the fertilizers. So that also becomes the prevention part of it, where the carbon can be prevented. Coming to our third, thing which I just discussed, project on sustainable agriculture practices. So since we work with a lot of paddy farmers, rice farmers, we are working through our not-for-profit trust on sustainable agriculture practices. So this is one of the experiments which we are doing, change of practices in terms of puddling, direct seeding rice. So what we are doing essentially is helping reduce water, irrigation, and fertilizer dose, and seeing what is the impact on the yield. So we are doing these experiments throughout this couple of states, and seeing, if we, let's suppose, reduce the water content by 75% or change the practice to a direct seeded rice, what is the impact on the yield if we reduce the fertilizer dosage from 100% to 75%, and then combining it with various types of soils and various varieties of rice. And so ultimate idea is, let's suppose if we are able to reduce water and fertilizer dosage and seeing the impact on reduction in the yield, can that reduction be compensated through the carbon credits? So that is the ultimate aim of this particular project. So you can see some of our experiments which we have done on yield and savings around water and fertilizer. So we use fair amount of technology. This is some of our tech model for identification of these fields and all. This is our team. My co-founder, Dr. Robert Berry, is based in UK and focuses on technology and social enterprises, other people from technology. So we've got fair amount of recognition of our work, awards from UN Global Makers Challenge. We've been tweeted by Prime Minister Office, and recently we won this big global climate change award from Cisco in September 2020. Yeah, that's it for our presentation.
Thank you, Sukhmeet. An excellent, story that you presented. आपने कहा कि वेस्ट को इसको वेस्ट तभी माना जाएगा जब तक कि हमें उसका कोई यूज उसका हम नहीं निकाल पाते हैं. You have shown us a story where you converted waste into wealth, and how one product, one byproduct rather, can be turned into a product. Not one, you developed multiple products. Why I'm so thrilled with yours and the explanation and the working which Dr. Usha Barwale is doing. Particularly, it is an eye-opener, or the initiatives that you guys have taken, they are eye-openers for many of us, because I was told by Vikas that we have many of the startups and entrepreneurs and likely to be entrepreneurs on this group. And my question, to you before I go to Ben, will be, see, Madam Barwale also is working on rice ecosystem rather, and your work also on residue mitigation or management is on rice, paddy only. So can we integrate, Madam Barwale, can we integrate, because this management, not only the values that we add during the production systems, but values that we add during the management of the produce as well as the residue. That is a key for carbon farming. So can we integrate these values? This is one question. Second is, what is, do you think there is a scope, Sukhmeet, whether your initiative, of course, you are having a great initiative, and you presented excellent figures of saving or preventing 17 million kg of CO2 from escaping into the environment, and saving us of all the particulate pollution. But despite that, we have a lot more issues. So do you think there is a need for many more industry? There is a scope for many more people to join your effort? And how do we take, what is the response of the farmer? Whether you are incentivizing the farmer to take up this practice, because we still have a spike in the burning. So let me go to Sukhmeet and then Madam Barwale, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bhupinder. a question about how we can scale this up. I guess from a farmer's perspective, they are very happy if somebody actually takes the stubble out of their field. Currently, we give around 3,000 rupees per acre, uh, 3,000 to 4,000 rupees per acre, depending upon the amount of stubble, to any farmer or a farmer entrepreneur who collects this stubble waste and gives this us to our collection point. Now, in our kind of a setup, there requires a significant amount of capital investment for the processing, which we realize that we can't be expecting farmers to put up units, like us. But in between, there has to be companies like us, entrepreneurs like us, who will process this stubble into different products. But having said that, there is always let's suppose talking about the fuel line, there is always a very direct competition from coal, which is, as an energy intensive nation, we get coal at a very cheaper rates, for the industry. So that becomes a key competition point of view. And as I said, every processing unit would require serious amount of so every effort of putting up a unit would require a significant amount of capital, right? So that becomes an bottleneck for multiplying these units. Talking about this energy, I guess yes, there is a lot of synergy which I see with MAM's effort and what we are doing. So we are also looking for partners who can help us monetize carbon credits. Our aim is then to give back value to the farmers, because if a farmer is not burning stubble and working with us on giving the stubble, can we give something back apart from the direct monetary price which we are able to give because of fuel production or biochar production? Apart, over and above, can we give something extra because of the carbon credits? So I guess yes, there's an opportunity.
Thank you, Sukhmeet. Over to Mrs. Barwale. Madam, I have an added question because he spoke about paying rupees 3,000 per acre of stubble. So, as if we talk about the carbon credits, one carbon credit equivalence in terms of rupee, if we talk about incentivizing the farmer. Of course, there is a bigger question of which I'll ask Sukhmeet also, that of course you are doing some wonderful work on management, water management, and DSR and other techniques, but are you also monitoring the GHG's emission in that? Because I couldn't find that there, because GHG is, or the CO2 equivalence is the criteria for defining or monitoring or verifying the carbon credits. So that was one. Of course, you don't have to reply. You can just nod like this if you have done it. If you have not done it, it's okay. We will do it. But madam, what is the rate at which the carbon credits are being, traded, or likely, if it multiplies? And then, do you think we need many more Grow India initiatives, or like Vera is there, a certifying agency? This was one. And I believe, you have submitted a project on rice ecosystem. There could be many such, initiatives in a project mode that can be taken up by the entrepreneurs, who can then probably, we can approach Vera. So question is to you, madam, do we need many more initiatives like Grow India, Indigo, for popularizing the carbon credit business, and whether there is a international agency in our country or a agency in our country who will vouch for what the claims that we make, and what is the rate of the carbon credit?
Thank you so much. Several questions there. So let me start with the carbon credit price. It's a good place to start. So just in the month of August, our partner Indigo, one of our founders, Indigo Ag, which is a US company, was issued the first carbon credit from commercial agriculture. And this carbon credit was sold at a price of $40. So this is a publicly available information per carbon credit. The trading price was $40. Now, if we look at the carbon credit, which will come from the smallholder farming systems, one would anticipate that you might be able to get a better price because of the social spillover benefits, which are not being considered otherwise. So what would be, so if you look at the carbon credit does not account for the water saving. It does not account for drudgery to women or to labor in general. We are not accounting for the sustainable produce premium that the farmers could achieve. So all of these, our expectation is that the price point will be above $40. But I want to emphasize here that it's very, very important that we focus on the quality of the carbon credit. You know, we don't want to go the same way what happened with the power sector in number of years back, where the carbon credit price went down to, you couldn't trade the credit even for $1. And so you want to make sure that we focus on validation, verification, the monitoring, measurement, so that the quality of the carbon credit which is produced is globally tradable. And so it brings me to your second point, which is around the carbon registry. So there are a number of registries already, Dr. Singh, which are there. Vera is one of them. We've used the Vera protocol because we feel it provides a good coverage of the practice changes that we are talking about, and a little bit of flexibility in terms of sequestration and mitigation. So that fits our smallholder farmer system. I don't feel it's also for us, it's important that we have the flexibility to trade these credits globally to get the best price possible. So, of course, if somebody wanted to create a registry in India, there's nothing which stops them. But it is not that today we have a shortage of registries, right? That's the second point. The third point was, is there synergy? Definitely. In fact, I'll reach out to you, Sukhmeet, afterwards to talk about biochar as a big component, which very well can work with what it is that we are doing, and hopefully what we are doing works also with Sukhmeet's project. So tremendous synergy. Do we need many more projects? Definitely. We are a large agrarian society, and we are our premise really is that farmer must see an incentive for doing a practice change. And if we are able to provide that, we feel that the adoption by the farmer would be high. I'll stop there for now. I hope I've addressed your points.
May I just get it to Sukhmeet regarding the GHG emissions, because a very simple intervention, madam. If you are going for a raised bed rather than the flat bed, you can reduce the GHG emissions. And water, of course, it's a trigger. This is one. Sukhmeet, so you probably plan to monitor the GHG emissions?
Yes, so there are two things which we are working on. On the fuel side, yes, we want to monetize it. When we are converting the agriculture waste into any type of green fuel, that is where we want as an organization to monetize and also pass on some of the incentives to our end users of the fuel. One is to be also competitive and comparing it with fossil fuel like coal. On our other outreach activities, because we work with a lot of farmers, so the other outreach activities around sustainable agriculture practices in the rice, as I said, reducing water or reducing fertilizers, that is where we want to give all the value back to the farmers. And a lot of that work goes through our not-for-profit. As I said, we work on two models. We run a trust and our private limited. So a lot of that work around farmer agriculture practices, changing, reducing the carbon footprint of the farmers in rice production. That is where we want to give a lot of value back to the farmers through the carbon credits.
Okay, thank you, Sukhmeet. So guys, let me thank Usha ji as well as Sukhmeet for excellent insights into it. And let me tell you, Veera recently, they announced 1 billionth carbon credit to a company which was engaged in water management. And we have Ben Hunt. You already, Sukhmeet has shown us some insight into how water management could be critical, for regenerative agriculture practices. But Ben is from Wessex Water, which are and working as a catchment. And water is a commodity which is scarce. We may say we have a lot of water around, but not a drop to drink. Okay, so time is not far when we'll be struggling even for water. What are the efforts Ben is making, and how Ben thinks, Ben will be coming to India also, hopefully in February. So Ben, we look forward to listening to you, how the water management, particularly the efforts of Wessex, they can help us in carbon farming from the water management aspects. Thank you very much. Please, Ben.
Thank you, Bhupinder. Are you able to see this presentation?
Slides is visible. You can make it into slideshow mode.
Can you see the first slide, Bhupinder?
It's not in slideshow mode, but it is fine. You can go ahead, please.
We can see it.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me along to talk this afternoon, and thanks to the previous two speakers for introducing the topic so well. So I'm Ben Hunt. I'm an agronomist for a privately owned water company in the UK. I work alongside farmers to improve drinking water quality, and our main water quality issues in the UK are very high levels of nitrates and pesticides, which arise from intensive agricultural activities. And water companies have been working with farmers in this way, incentivizing them to farm more sustainably for decades. And they see it as a more sustainable way of working, as in it deals with the source of the problem, the source of the water quality problems, instead of just using a sticky plaster and building very expensive treatment works. So it's also a more cost-effective way for water companies to operate. And I became very interested in carbon credits and carbon markets as an additional incentive to drive even more change within agriculture to improve water quality.
Ben,
the
hello.
slides are not moving.
Yeah, Ben, your slides aren't moving, and also could you put it on the presentation mode?
Did that change?
Yeah, your slides aren't actually moving.
I think you have to reshare in the presentation mode. You have to reshare.
Yeah.
Do you escape from the slideshow mode? That will be fine. Escape from the slideshow mode. Now you move the slide. Next one, you go.
Yeah, I hadn't actually changed slides. That's probably the main reason.
No, you don't. You come out of the slideshow mode. Don't go into the slideshow mode.
Sure. Okay. So you can see the slides now?
We are on slide 1.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as I said, I became interested in carbon credits as an additional incentive. And so I was successful in applying for a Nuffield farming scholarship to travel overseas and study how people around the world were making a success of using carbon credits to incentivize farmers to farm more sustainably. And hopefully it's changed to the second slide. I'd take that as a yes. So
yes,
first
Ben,
of all,
that's quite all right.
Brilliant. Why sustainable ag? Why do we need to accelerate the adoption of regenerative farming? So we know that we're going to need more resilient soils in the future to cope with the challenges that climate change will bring. First of all, we need water security. Studies show that if we don't do anything different in a climate that's warming and becoming more extreme, water security is going to get worse. So we need to intervene and farm in a more sustainable way that protects and improves water quality. Secondly is financial security. So we know that input costs for farmers are rising around the world, and all things being equal, if you've still got the same chance of getting a crop failure, but you've invested a lot more money into growing that crop, then your risk exposure as a farmer is far greater. And food security as well. So not only is agriculture a contributor to climate change, it's also probably the sector that stands to lose the most from it, with it being so weather dependent for its success. And there are also, so it's very important for agriculture to both mitigate climate change and reduce emissions, but also adapt to it as well by improving soils. There's many other benefits that we read about as well from regenerative farming. I won't list them all, but things like flood risk mitigation, if your soils can hold more water, reduce soil erosion, increase nutrient density, etc., etc. So with all those benefits on offer, why is regenerative farming not scaling faster, and what are the barriers? So there was a recent report out in the UK that explored this issue, and it said that regenerative farming is not scaling fast enough, it's not growing fast enough to meet the challenges of the future. And it identified several barriers, but the major barrier that was identified was the financial one. And it basically said that if farmers aren't able to overcome the financial barrier, they are unlikely to try and overcome some of the other barriers, like learning and knowledge of how to farm regeneratively. So by focusing on incentives and carbon credits as an incentive, it's definitely the right thing to be thinking about. But there wasn't much activity happening in the UK with carbon credits. I think that it was viewed with suspicion, it seemed fraught with challenges, and it was often described in the UK as the Wild West. But there seem to be several success stories around the world where people were seemingly making a success of carbon markets and overcoming these challenges. So that's why I undertook the Nuffield Farming Scholarship, to give me that opportunity to travel overseas and meet with these projects and people. So what I found was, at a very high level, there is potential for carbon credits to incentivize farmers. On one hand, you've got a projected growing demand for carbon credits from companies that need to offset their emissions to meet their net zero goals. And on the other side of the fence, you have soils that have lost much of their native carbon stock, and by changing farming practices, they can regain some of that carbon stock. So they have the potential to be a carbon sink and supply carbon credits into that marketplace. So at a very high level, there's potential, but when you get down into the detail, I still identified challenges with the projects I visited overseas. And here are some of the challenges. I think that the biggest one was additionality. What I found was most of the farmers participating in these carbon programs were those front-running farmers, those farmers that were already farming regeneratively before they entered the carbon program. In other words, the carbon credits hadn't resulted in them doing anything differently. They were already doing those practices. And the concept of additionality is that the carbon credits, the money from carbon credits should lead to some sort of change that wasn't already happening. So I felt quite uncomfortable with some of the projects I visited overseas in terms of additionality, because if there is no additionality, essentially, if a company has paid a farmer for doing practices they're already doing, they've essentially bought a permit to carry on polluting, and the money from the carbon credits hasn't actually resulted in any net gain for the climate. So the climate is the thing that loses out. The second challenge I've identified is permanence. So if a company is offsetting emissions of carbon dioxide that are in the atmosphere for several hundred years, then you need an offset that offsets that carbon emission for an equivalent amount of time. And I'm not aware of any mechanisms in agriculture that can guarantee that level of permanence. When you think about a lot of land in the UK, at least, is rented by farmers. They're tenants of the land, so they don't have full control of it for long periods of time. And even people that own their farms could easily sell sell that land and change hands to somebody that might want to farm that land differently, and the risk is that that carbon could be re-released. And I think some of the things I've just talked about threaten the credibility of carbon credits from agriculture, and I think this is really important. So really what I identified is the level of incentive being paid by the carbon credits is only really enough to incentivize those farmers that are already doing those practices. It's not significant enough to incentivize those die-hard, very intensive farmers to change. And that's why I found there was little additionality. And I think if we can't overcome some of those challenges, the credibility will hold back the carbon price from increasing, because buyers need to feel confident in what they're buying when they're purchasing carbon credits. Also, carbon credits provide a revenue stream for farmers, but they don't provide a startup cost. And that's a potential barrier to farmers adopting some of the bigger changes. They might be able to adopt some of these smaller changes that require less investment, but for some of those bigger changes, one could argue that farmers need help with some of the startup costs to invest in them in the first place, to be able to generate the carbon credits off the back of them, the revenue stream. What I found was there's many carbon programs out there. It's very complicated and very confusing for farmers. And there doesn't seem to be much consistency between them. They all have different rules. They all have different definitions of things like additionality. And I think this inconsistency breeds caution among farmers. And certainly in the UK, I think farmers are very cautious and very confused by it all. And it's leading to inaction and a lack of participation in carbon markets. Measurement as well. Someone described to me that measuring soil carbon changes in the soil is like trying to weigh a large cruise ship and then trying to put one person on board and re-weighing the ship, i.e. it's difficult to detect small changes against a very large background. I think that there are challenges and risks associated with participating in carbon markets for farmers, supply chains and agriculture as a sector. And I think I don't have time to go into the detail of this, but there are questions we should be asking ourselves, because there are consequences and risks associated with what decisions we make. And one person described to me soil carbon as, or soil like a landfill site for carbon. And so let's use that analogy. And they said to me that at the moment, it's a bit like farmers don't know how big their landfill site is. And they also don't know how much garbage of their own, i.e. emissions, that they have to go into that landfill site. Their supply chains, so the people that buy their commodities, their milk, their grain, their rice, they also don't know how much garbage they have that might need to go into that landfill site. And agriculture as a whole, as a sector, also doesn't know how much garbage it has that needs to go into that landfill site. And what I mean by that is if agriculture or some of these companies in the supply chain are mandated by government to become net zero, they need to be sure that they have offsets available to them to offset their own emissions to become net zero. And by selling carbon without thinking about this, are we potentially shooting ourselves in the foot? I think farmers as well, they need to think about who they're selling the carbon to. Do they keep carbon within their own supply chain and sell it to the person that also buys their commodities? Or do they sell it outside of their supply chain to offsetters, people outside their supply chain, like airlines, for example? And I think that has quite big consequences in terms of risk for them. And should we be thinking about what type of carbon credit we should be selling as well? So a farmer could sell a reduction credit or an avoidance credit where they've reduced their emissions, or they could sell removal credits where they're taking, for example, growing a cover crop and removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and locking it into their soil. And again, I think that has implications in terms of risk. So in summary, there's little doubt that agriculture needs to change and adapt for climate change. I think we're absolutely focusing on the right thing by talking about incentives here. I think the carbon credits do have potential, but I would say that at the current carbon price, they are only one piece of the puzzle. On their own, they aren't sufficient to incentivize the big changes in agriculture that we potentially need. The short-term business model just isn't compelling enough at the moment at the current carbon price. Because of this, I think it will be important to think about stacking payments from different ecosystem services. So carbon credits, but also there are markets emerging in the UK for water quality credits and biodiversity credits as well. So I think the stacking of revenue from those different sources could add up to a meaningful incentive to farmers to drive real change in agriculture. I think it's remembering that this also isn't all about incentives. I think probably there is a role for regulation in agriculture to drive change, and also entrepreneurship, encouraging more of that. I think in general, carbon is definitely an opportunity for farmers. It's just thinking about what route to go down, who to sell that carbon to, what type of credit to sell, and thinking about the consequences and risks of what you do with your carbon. There are definitely challenges that need to be overcome with carbon credits in the carbon market in order to provide that credibility that that buyers need. And I think that will be what unlocks the potential for the carbon price to increase. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you for your time in listening. And as Bhupender said, I'm visiting India in February, March time next year. So if anyone would like to link in with me on that trip, then please feel free to get in touch with me. I would love to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
सुरू झाली का? आता त्या पासवर्डने घेत नाहीये ना? बरं, आपल्याकडे आता आहे टीम व्ह्यू.
नितिन म्यूट कर लीजिए. Thank you, Ben, for an excellent overview. You can also mute, Ben. See, the carbon credit business in India is at the nascent stage. We are learning, and so I think the same hint was given to us by Ben also. In UK also, it is beginning to grow. The business is beginning to grow. What insights probably we get from Ben's presentation is, Ben, you talked about biodiversity, water, and carbon sequestration. All these three, if you look at the VIRA's program, all these three are part of the carbon credit or carbon farming business. Even I think their site lists even plastic management and some of the environmental issues that plague us. Those can also qualify. Now, point is, and Madam, as you said, Dr. Usha said about the times when this carbon farming business, it grew, and how it doomed down, and people are not even ready to pay anything. We are at nascent stage. We don't want to make mistakes, so that we want that, say, it is like a cryptocurrency. A business that we start, should they be there for the next few centuries at least, so that we are having a environmentally sustainable agriculture. For, if you look at the sustainable development goals of the United States, not only the climate mitigation, climate sustainability, poverty, zero hunger, energy sustainability, we have so many things to do. Our plates are full. Now, Madam, you talked about the quality of the carbon credits. I think what the same hint Ben gives when he says that should we pay for the practices that the farmer is already doing, and that is not going to bring in a sea change. I think Vera has it qualifies there that a practice, if it is adopted, should make some sea change in 3 to 5 years. So if it does not bring in a sea change in next 3 to 5 years, that does not qualify for carbon monitoring. Very, very difficult times ahead, and we need to protect our generations. We need to protect our soils. We need to protect our agriculture. Challenges are huge. So I would like to have a take from Madam Usha Barwale regarding the quality of the carbon credits, and also the point which Ben made regarding somebody also raised in this one, that now presently, madam, we are going from organic culture or organic farming to natural farming to hydroponic or vertical farming, that we have terrace farming. So can we bring all these aspects also within the ambit of carbon credits? If yes, how? Then how, a person like me, can get a verifiable credits, carbon credits? Who is verifying for us? Whether there is an agency, I know it's at the nation stage, and a great initiative taken by Grow India, great initiative taken by A2P, great initiative taken by Ben. But we need to probably, there are two things which I would like to have your answers. One, who should one approach? Second is, what are the challenges that we have in this area? This is a question to all. I'll start with Madam Usha Barwale. The challenges that we have in this area in order to ensure that the carbon credit business, it flourishes and it's not just a day's phase, it stays. And the third point which I want to ask is, that how, I personally feel, what are the startups that you think we need in this area of regenerative farming, or say in monitoring, because ultimately you mentioned about carbon quality. So what is the carbon quality? Is it what Ben was suggesting? Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So very interesting and very important question in terms of the quality of the carbon credit. And before we actually endeavored in the carbon program, I myself, I would say, was not very clear about what exactly does this mean, right? So there are lots of different, and I see that from the questions as well, that the perception about how you get a carbon credit is everyone has a different perception. So the key in the carbon program, as I understand it and see it, is that the element of additionality is a critical element, right? So you don't reward somebody for something which they've been doing for 10 years. Of course, one can argue that, because they've been doing a good practice, now they're not eligible. Yes. But what we are looking for is a net impact, right? From the date which the project starts at. So it's a start date of the project, which is very important. And the quality of the credit is determined by, there are different ways in which we can monitor the quality, but I would just talk about the basic thing that we all discuss is around MRV, or what are you measuring, what are you reporting, and how is that verified, right? So now if I talk about measurement and I say that the farmer has done direct seeded rice, I can, by remote sensing data, I can see which year was the time in which the farmer shifted the practice from conventional rice to direct seeded rice. Now, if the farmer says that I've not done direct seeded rice, but the satellite image shows that they have, then clearly that would not go into assessing what the carbon credit issuance to them would be. So this measurement with scientific data is extremely critical. So it's not, of course, what we do is that we first step in the process is that the farmer's own data. So what farmer shares with us in terms of what is it that they've been doing, how long they've been doing it. This then gets validated with the science in terms of remote sensing, and then we are doing quantification with geochemical modeling and other means to be able to quantify what is the carbon credit which is generated. Now, once we have done this, it goes for a third-party external audit. This audit process is very similar to what we would have, let's say, in ISO, for instance, where an external auditor comes and validates and verifies what I have claimed is accurate by random sampling and so on and so forth. At which point of time, then that report gets submitted to the carbon registry, in our case, Verra. Verra, based on that report, would issue the carbon credit. So so there's the audit process is an important one also, because it's not just my word which goes, but it is the auditor who's recognized by Verra, but or also IPCC for that matter. But these are auditors who are experienced in that. But I can't overemphasize the importance of science in the background to really create a good carbon credit. And then, of course, the permanence of the credit, which will then give you that additional value over time. So I'll stop there for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Over to Sukhmeet for his views.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, from a challenge perspective, one of the biggest challenge which we think currently would be, how do we incentivize farmers for any change in practice? And by the incentive, I would mean that, we can't say that, change this practice, we will then apply for a project, we will monitor that, and, after at least a year or more than that, you will get some benefit out of that. And a lot of times this benefit also is not, cannot be termed as a definite, rupee value. That becomes a challenge for a small farmer or a small landholder. If we are saying that, change in this practice, it may result in, either more, less in yield or some more expenses. But if as a, project partner, I think that step has to be taken in advance, which can tell the farmer or pay the farmer immediately for any change in practice. I guess that we have seen, becomes a challenge when we are explaining these things, because, for a farmer, explaining carbon credits or regenerative practices and all, doesn't make sense, because the farmer has to make money for the next crop to be sown. I think that is one of the biggest challenge which needs to be addressed in this space.
And Sukhmeet, do you think there is a scope for startups? And if yes, in what area you perceive there could be some startups, in order to facilitate the whole carbon farming, as you see from you said there is a great difficulty in convincing the farmers, or to in order to ensure monitoring in the field, verify it in the field. Of course, simulation modeling and all will be effective, but you need to have some real-time monitoring also. So any startups you perceive, that can help. Of course, your initiative is commendable.
Thank you, Dr. Bhupinder. I think, yes, there is a lot of work being done already. If I see the complete value chain, it starts with the inputs. So if we talk about sustainable agriculture practices, just to give you an example, if farmers today say that, okay, I'll use biochar as a replacement for fertilizer, I guess in today's context, there aren't any big biochar manufacturing companies. Sometimes we also have to refuse that, okay, we don't have capacities, we can't give large quantities of biochar. So that becomes a opportunity for startups to come into picture. That is just one key example. There could be other practices like how do you help farmer reduce irrigation or reduce water or reduce electricity or reduce even other fertilizers. So this becomes the whole conservation piece around energy, which then can be resulted or monetized into carbon credits, is a big area. You're not only helping farmers benefit directly in some way, but also helping monetize carbon credits. This is just at the part of the inputs. Then, coming to where we practice in terms of taking out stubble or stubble management or crop-based management. So then there are companies which can convert this into, let's say, cutlery, to energy, to this some kind of paper product. So we do, because we collect stubble in large quantities, we do get a lot of requests from these kind of companies which want to use crop waste. So there are a lot of companies, but I guess that's just a drop in the ocean. There is an opportunity for a lot of companies to come into at every part of the value chain.
Ben, let me come to you regarding the whole issue, how you see it. And regarding what I felt was that, you mentioned in your presentation that the companies, they want to offset their emissions and they want to trade in carbon credits. But for that, we need to have a verified carbon credits, say like Grow India or Indigo, Grow Indigo. If the Indigo is already paid the farmers for the carbon credits, that means they are acquiring the carbon credits which can be sold. And as Madam Barwale said, that international market will be the best. But what I see, Dr. Usha, there will be national market also for this. So, of course, we may not be getting that price, but where we have multinational companies playing, we have been approached by several of the companies, say, if you want me to name Nestle, Shell, many other companies, they approach us and they want their production system operations to be net zero. They want to have at least the idea about what are their GHG emissions and where they can curtail. So the companies which are into producing more, they would like to curtail. Madam wants to supplement. Dr. Usha, please.
Just very briefly, sir. So when I said that we should have global markets available, it is inclusive also of domestic market. The intention being that the farmer receives the best price possible or the best incentive. So I was not excluding the India market, but having that global market creates that competition so that companies who want to offset within the country should also be willing to pay that price.
No, I got your point, madam. My intent was that I was trying to come to verification of the units, because Vera will be verifying, or some other registry, credit registry will be verifying. And after verifications, these can be sold to the national as well as the international clients, whosoever wants. So Ben, over to you. What are the challenges that you perceive? Because you are working in this area directly, and what you think will be the commonalities between you raised several points. So within India and UK, how do you see us coming together on this count, please?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say there is a lot to be said for soil carbon credits and carbon credits generated from agriculture. When you think about the added value that can come from a soil carbon credit in terms of water quality, biodiversity, adapting agriculture for climate change, and therefore improving food security, I think there's a lot of good, fantastic points that they carry. But I think we have to realize that carbon credits from agriculture are actually in competition with carbon credits from other sources as well. And those sources might not carry as much weight in terms of additional benefits. For example, like direct air capture is a technology that's being developed, but it only really has a carbon benefit. It only removes carbon from the atmosphere. It doesn't have these additional benefits like water quality and biodiversity. However, we are still in competition with those carbon credits. So there is an opportunity for agriculture. I think the credibility, though, of those credits is so important. And I think there are lots of NGOs out there. There are examples where companies have tried to use offsets and they've been torn apart in the media and received really bad PR from these NGOs. because they picked holes in the types of offsets that they've used and said that it's greenwashing. So I think it doesn't take too many of those bad PR stories before companies start to worry about buying that type of carbon credit. So I think this is something that we have to be really aware of in the agricultural space. There's an opportunity there for us, but we need to be supplying credible carbon credits that we truly believe in. And some of the issues I identified, like additionality and permanence, I think, you know, if an NGO was to understand some of these issues, they would be able to pick holes in them at the moment. And I think it could damage the credibility, which ultimately is going to affect the price of carbon credits that farmers can sell. So there's an opportunity there. It's just some of these credibility issues are quite important to bringing the opportunity to fruition, I think.
Thank you for a very clear and crisp reply. Madam, we are already 15 minutes to the close. So I would like to take the questions which are there in the chat box. And many people, you know, this is of course in my mind. I was wondering if Sukhmeet is drawing the parali from the farmers and then managing it. Of course, he's paying not as a carbon incentive or a carbon credit, but he's paying for the saving the environment, for managing that, because he's then, you know, making revenue out of it. So whether his initiatives will come in can be accounted for carbon credit if he submits a project to Vera. This is one. Second, similar questions are mentioned by some of our friends who say that they are into scientific storage of crops and they reduce food rotting and waste, and thus result in lower emissions. So any activity which the farmers, which the industry or startups are doing, do they also collectively qualify for carbon credits? So this is question one to you, madam.
Absolutely. So I think any agricultural activity, or for that matter, any activity where we are able to quantify that there is reduction in greenhouse gases or carbon sequestration would be eligible for submission. That would be one. Now, of course, we have to remember always the point about additionality, because when the project begins, it has to be a practice change from the existing practice. So that would be one thing. In terms of the rice straw, so the straw management is one element which definitely can be claimed in the carbon credit, as I understand, but not straw burning, or because Punjab bans the straw burning by law, so you can't really incentivize a practice which is illegal. So, but in situ management or off situ management of the straw, and then of course again quantification in terms of what the greenhouse gas emission reduction or mitigation has been, would definitely lead to the carbon credit generation.
Guys, let me add to what Madam Usha said. You know, IERI themselves, they are into the business of not the business, but they are into in situ management of residues. So Sukhmeet is into making energy from waste, and we are having a great product, Pusa Decomposer, which is meant for in situ management of this waste, and thereby we allow the conversion of decompose the waste right in the field within 15 to 20 days, and that is a very, very novel activity, which is the area under by Pusa Decomposer waste management of residue, paddy residue. It is increasing with each passing day. So that was a supplement from me. So another question is that we at Living Greens are converting roof crops into organic farms. Whether to produce food inside and it's a natural gift. We feel that every rooftop farm has the potential for producing carbon credits. Then we would like to reply. Any one of you can supplement, and I will add to it not only the rooftop farms, but as I mentioned, the vertical farming, water hydroponics, aeroponics. So, do they also qualify for carbon credits? When you would like to answer, Madam Barwale?
So the question was, can rooftop farming and something else qualify for carbon credits? Was that the question?
Yeah. You didn't get the question?
If you could just repeat it.
I asked whether rooftop farming or vertical farming, can those be used for generating carbon credits, because they will be essentially saving the resources and conserving the resources also. Yes.
I would say I'm not the expert on that, but I haven't thought about it before. So I would, possibly, and probably technically yes. I think with some of these things, you have to think about the perception of the buyer of the carbon credit, and would they feel that we were stretching the kind of the truth somewhat, and whether they would feel comfortable in buying a carbon credit like that. You have to remember the buyer has to justify what they're doing to their customers and consumers. So I think, yeah, possibly, technically, I can see where the question has come from in his thinking, but it's whether you can find a buyer for a carbon credit like that, I think.
Yeah. So I think what you mentioned, it is the scale of rooftop farming. That is also key. The scale at which you are doing it. If you are able to have a measurable and quantifiable and sufficient carbon gains, then it should be definitely qualified. But we'll have to make, as I already said, we are at the nascent stage. And another question is, what about the organic fertilizers and pesticides? There is still a dilemma when you talk about organic farming versus conventional farming. Which of these two will generate more of the CO2 or methane? There is, of course, use of pesticide. Definitely, production, not only the use of pesticide, but production of pesticide per se will be, generating a lot of negative carbon. So that, of course, if you are using less of carbon, less of pesticide, definitely it should qualify. But madam, whether it is a because is it a part of regenerative agriculture practices, less use of pesticide?
So very good. I would say the carbon credits are directly related to the carbon dioxide equivalents, right? So there are, broadly speaking, 5 different gases that can come into that, and from an agriculture perspective, CO2, N2O, and CH4, or methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide are the major contributors. So if we go to less pesticide use, we have to be able to document that one of these 3 gases has been impacted, because the pesticide itself, unless in the production of the pesticide, in the process, the way it was manufactured, there is something which says that it has used X energy, and the organic fertilizer didn't use it. Those things we have to quantify. So if we can't quantify it in these 3 terms, then you can't actually generate credit. I mean, so unfortunately, water also falls in that category. So Vera, for instance, does not account for or recognize water as one element of regenerative agriculture practice leading to carbon credit. And so, whereas Gold Standard does issue a water certificate, which you could use in addition or combination with your carbon credit to maybe get a higher price to show that you've used less water. But so we have to be able to quantify the greenhouse gas amounts for them to be eligible for a carbon credit.
Madam, another question is, which is an agency to approach to avail carbon credits for farming? Very difficult questions, of course.
No, it's actually a relatively simple question, I would say. So, no agency to approach for carbon credit issuance. Okay, I mean not issuance, but carbon credit monetization, I would say. So issuance can happen from the carbon registries, like I mentioned, Vera, Gold Standard, Rabobank has a new program as well. A number of different other agencies, the Carbon Action Reserve, which is a more US focused program. So all of these registries exist. So you have to register your program with one of them. Then once the credits are issued, it is the buyer, right? The buyer who's going to be paying the money, which ultimately flow to the farmer or whoever can claim the credit.
Okay, one question I want, I'll ask for the benefit of everybody, that if Vera is certifying the carbon credits, will they also be buying the credits or no? Or we are bound to sell it to them?
This meeting is being recorded.
Like ask other companies can come. A group of and be able to offer them to a buyer. The buyer could be, I mentioned, Dr. Singh, President, joint secretary.